Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Opportunistic Trader. It's just after 10:30 on November 16th, and now we're joined by Alan Hill, lead consultant at Treasury Consultancy. Alan's been joining us regularly in blogs, in our FX blog regularly about FX and the Brexit situation. Alan, how are you this morning?
Hi, good morning. I'm fine, Mike. Thank you.
So I guess, we've had a ton of headlines, a ton of price action in FX, specifically in the pound. As somebody local over there, what's going on and what's the latest? And, give me a little bit of a recap of this week's events and Brexit talk.
Sure. Okay. Well, this week's events were started with the confirmation that an agreement had been reached between the UK and the EU on the divorce on the UK's departure from the EU, officially next March, with a transition period going through until the end of 2020. There was not much singing and dancing on either side of the English Channel, to be frank, about the agreement, but it was what it was, and Theresa May said it was, at the time, that it was the best deal that she could get. There had been rumours for quite some time that it wasn't going to be what everyone wanted, particularly the Irish border and the backstop agreement. The Irish border, because obviously there is a border between the north and south of Ireland being in the EU and the north of Ireland being part of the United Kingdom. Both sides, funny enough, in the discussions wanted an open border between the north and the south in order to facilitate trade to continue. But the EU were particularly concerned about goods from the EU finding their way into the UK without the necessary customs duties being paid once Brexit took place. So that was always the issue over the open border. With regard to the backstop agreement was to be something where, with an open border, the UK could decide to close the border at any time it wanted, and it was its sovereign right to do so. And that was offset by the fact that in the agreement that the Northern Ireland would stay kind of quasi part of the customs union, whereas the rest of the UK wouldn't, which has not gone down very well with Northern Ireland or with Scotland, because they also want to have the same facilities that Northern Ireland had. And to cut a long story short, basically what's happened is the backstop cannot be triggered by the UK without the actual agreement, rather than a tacit agreement, an actual agreement of the EU. So what the Brexiteers are all saying, and all those who left the cabinet after the meeting the other day, were saying, well, basically this is no Brexit. The UK are staying in the EU until the EU say we can leave, which is clearly not what was voted for. There was a cabinet meeting of the government on, where are we now, Friday, on Tuesday evening, Wednesday evening, at which, following which, Theresa May came out and said, we have an agreement, it's the best agreement we can have, and we have consensus among the cabinet. So they basically voted in favour of it. She didn't at any moment say that was a unanimous decision, so it was clear there were some doubters within the cabinet. Looking back to the Chequers thing, where we had a whole weekend before we had the first two resignations. The first resignation came about 8 hours after the meeting, when the Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, the second Brexit Secretary the UK's had, and possibly the last, decided to resign, followed by the Work and Pension Secretary, who also resigned, and then two further, more junior ministers also resigned. Today, we've had two leading Brexiteers who are still part of the cabinet, the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, and the Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, both pledging their support for Mrs May, which is a bit odd because they clearly do not agree with the sentiments of the agreement, because they are Brexiteers. They voted to leave the EU, and yet they are remaining in the cabinet. Now, there is a sceptic would say, well, of course they're staying in the cabinet, because when Mrs May gets turfed out, which may or may not happen in the next few days, there will need to be people who stand to be leader who actually are still members of the cabinet. So those two, clearly their support for Mrs May is very short term, and simply means that they are staying in the tent looking out, rather than being outside the tent looking in. So that's where we are as of now. There are letters of the Conservative Party has a policy or a rule where, in order for the leader to be ousted, 48 members of Parliament have to write a letter of no confidence in her. And I'm not sure of the exact number. I'm not sure the exact number has even been published. But I know there have been one or two very high-profile letters already written asking for a no confidence vote. And I'm not sure how close we are to that 48, but it will probably come out at some point that we're getting closer and closer. If that happens, then it's a simple majority of MPs. The Conservatives have 315 MPs, and it's a simple majority. So more than half of those have to for her to stand down or to leave, and then a leadership contest will take place. It's looking more and more likely that will happen, but Mrs May is proving herself to be extremely stubborn. But when she says she wants to sell the Brexit agreement to the public and to the government and to the opposition for that matter, unfortunately no one's buying right now.
So tell me this, yesterday we traded down, over the last few days, we traded down from about 130.50 down to 127.25, and now we're rebounding a bit. What was the reason for the knee-jerk lower, and what's the reason for the knee-jerk back up about a big figure?
Well, the market clearly believes no Brexit good, Brexit bad, and anything that brings a hard or a soft Brexit clearly contributes to those thoughts. The sterling traders believe that Brexit is bad fundamentally for the UK, and that it will take about, well, my view is it will take a generation, some people say less than that, 10 to 15 years, for the UK to get itself back to where it is today following Brexit. So the market, as soon as there's anything other than a soft Brexit, i.e. what we're seeing from the agreement, the traders will sell sterling down. And today, because Mrs May has seen two senior members of her cabinet support her, that's Michael Gove and Liam Fox, as I said earlier, once she has got that support, then there's a slightly higher probability, or possibility, I should say, of her retaining her position. And for that matter, that's why sterling's bounced back. And of course, there is short-term profit taking. People see sterling down from 130 and change down to 127 and change, and they see it as an opportunity to take profit. There isn't the will as yet to push sterling to new lows for the year. That, I believe, is coming as soon as Mrs May is ousted from the party, or at least a vote of no confidence is announced. So I think
if there is a vote of no confidence, what do you think price action is in pounds?
Lower.
Yeah, I know you've been trading a pound on the short side for a while now. When do you think that sort of event can take place? Is that the sort of thing that happens in the next, over the weekend or the next week, or is it something more of by the later in December?
No, it pretty much has to happen over the next week. The Brexiteers who are pushing this process now, they are trying to strike while the iron's hot. They know that there is a significant amount of angst regarding the agreement that Mrs May has come back with, and as such, they want to keep the pot boiling and get as many people over to their side as possible. There is, as I say, only 48 out of 315 have to produce one of these letters, and there's a lot of, if you like, dirty dealing going, and I'm sure you've seen a similar sort of thing in your, let's say dirty dealing, underhand dealing maybe is a better word to describe it, going on. I've seen it in your government, people making promises, people being promised, people who have designs upon being leader. Clearly you have David Davis, the previous Brexit secretary, and Boris Johnson as two very high profile members of the Brexit camp who probably have designs on the leadership. But the bookmakers, or the people making odds on these things in the UK at the moment, interestingly see Dominic Raab, the latest Brexit secretary, and the current Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, who is the son of would you believe, a Pakistani bus driver, as being the most likely winners of any leadership poll. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going to go on over the weekend. There always is a lot of toing and froing over the weekend with regard to these things. There's apparently a meeting taking place of the Brexiteers who remain on the cabinet tomorrow to thrash out what they want to do next, because clearly the agreement that Mrs May has is not what they expected, but they have basically committed themselves to staying within the cabinet. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will support Mrs May come what may.
Right. No, I mean, look, there's a lot going on. From my perspective over here in the United States, it just seems very complicated, and I don't see how they get something done here. It's just it's been 2 years, 2+ years, and it's a nonstop headache. And I don't see, and the other thing is, I don't understand necessarily why all these people resign, because, they know they need to get something done. And I guess they're resigning because they say it's not my deal, so I don't want to have my name attached to it. Is that right? That it's more they just don't want their name attached to it if it's not something that they want exactly?
It's pretty much. I mean, it sounds. I mean, some of the more old-fashioned members of Parliament have been saying it's a matter of honour. That, for example, Dominic Raab was hoisted into this position when David Davis resigned following Chequers. He has negotiated in good faith what he was. Funny, he voted Remain at the very first get-go of this thing, but he has done his best to negotiate a deal that the UK can, from a Brexiteer point of view anyway, can live with, and he's been overruled virtually every turn. So he was basically thrown under the bus by Theresa May on Wednesday evening when he actually read the final agreement, because it pretty much wasn't what he'd been negotiating all that time. There have been a number of people who've basically said no deal is better than a bad deal. Now we're saying, now a lot of people in commerce, for example, the chief executive of Jaguar, the car company, has said any deal is better than no deal. So it's a kind of a lot of semantics going on, but very little changes other than the UK wants to leave the EU. What's the deal going to be for the EU for the UK to leave the EU? Bearing in mind, there's a financial element to this as well. I mean, the UK is paying £39 billion to leave the EU, and people want value for money from that large amount. If you said, the amount of public services that are really struggling in the UK, the health service, etc., if you could inject that 39 billion to them, it would make a huge difference. But we're paying for something from the EU which has no value at all to us at the end of the day, and that is where the issues are arising from. This thing is going to basically take the next week to actually sort itself out, and it'll take much more of a political dimension than actually a simple Brexit dimension. Once we have a bit more clarity about who's going to be running the government and the Conservative Party over the next week or so, they can then go back to the EU or go back to Brussels and say the UK either accepts or doesn't the terms of the agreement that's been discussed. There have been rumblings from the continent today. Angela Merkel, for example, said the deal as it is the deal that will stand, and there will be no further negotiation. So that's put that to bed, or that's her vision anyway. But of course, the EU, Mrs Merkel doesn't speak for the EU Commission, and they will have maybe a different view on that. But as things stand right now, there is agreement. There is an agreement that will at some point, or should at some point, be voted on by the House of Parliament. We reckon that will be sometime in the possibly second or third week of December. But what that agreement will be and what the voting will be depends on what happens in the next week or so.
Yeah. You look, there's a lot of moving parts, like you just said. There's a lot going on. I appreciate you coming on, taking some time to speak with us, give us the update. It seems like a lot of chaos, but hopefully we start to see some progress and, get some resolution. Alan, I appreciate you taking the time. Alan Hill, Treasury Consultancy. We'll speak to you next week, and look for Alan's blogs as well. Thank you.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much, Mike. Have a good weekend.
All right.